Hey, welcome to the 5th annual Top 10 Worst Beers of the Year for 2013. Actually, I didn't do a video version of this in 2012. I did a text version of it. I'll link it all on the description box below. So anyways, if you saw my Top 10 Best Beers of 2013 or any of the other Top 10 Best or Worst videos, same rules apply. It's all beers that I had, or at least that I reviewed formally for the first time in 2013. Re-reviews don't count. And again, I'm not, rating these beers based on technical merit or the BJCP guidelines or anything like that. It's all just my personal preference. Don't be offended if I dislike some of the beers that you like. I mean, everybody, you can't argue taste. Although, I think a lot of the beers on this list, a lot of them are craft beer. Probably the reason that they made this list is because they were old bottles, but they weren't fresh dated. And that's my rule. My rule is if the brewery can't be bothered to put a freshness date, then I'm just gonna review it as is. If I know, I mean, there's been plenty of times where I've known that I'm drinking old beer and it tastes bad, so I'm like, okay, I'll just like log this in on Untappd, but I'm not gonna review it. So the same thing applies here. So anyways, same thing as the best of 2013 list. There's no video clips of any of these. I mean, at least there were some video clips of the best ones, but this is I'm just gonna read brief descriptions off the reviews, and we'll do pictures over it. All right, so let's get started. Number 10, Captain Lawrence Fresh Chester Pale Ale. It sucks starting off a list like this with not only a craft beer, but a craft beer from New York State, which is where I live. I found the quality of Captain Lawrence's beers have been declining, and I'm not sure if I'm going to even bother reviewing any of their beers in 2014. This beer claims to be a pale ale, but has a palate akin to an amber ale, and the appearance too. The hops are quite mild, and the maltiness is too twangy for the style. It almost reminds me of a sorghum-based brew, as there's a touch of sourness right on the finish. The label description mentions West Coast influence, but there's none of that here. No citrus, no flowers, instead just a general earthy character of tree bark and light resin. Number 9, Cigar City White Oak High IPA. I appreciate the originality of aging an IPA on white oak, however, this is just a bad tasting beer. The hop character has significantly faded and the palate is overrun by a distracting taste of herbs and ashes. The flavor I was most reminded of was pickle juice, as it's not so much bitter as it is salty. The white oak imparts the taste of a hot southern swamp in July. If I pay attention, I can detect some malty sweetness, but it doesn't make up for the damage done. I'm not sure what the brewer's intentions were with this beer, and I certainly don't understand the rave reviews. I doubt it's an old bottle, I just don't think this beer is for me. Number 8, Hangar 24 Orange Wheat. Beer geeks like me tend to mock the so-called crafty, fruity wheat beers like Shock Top and Blue Moon for tasting too fake. Hangar 24 Orange Wheat is the real deal, yet it's not any better. Brewed with real oranges to capitalize on the natural citrusy flavors often found in these types of wit beers, gives it a sweet, candy-like flavor. However, it falls apart quickly as there's a prominent sourness throughout the palate, and not in that good Brettanomyces lactobacillus kind of way. Immediate sourness as soon as it hits the tongue reminds me exactly of expired orange juice. A bit more authentic wheat character through the middle, but finishes with even more sourness on the end. I don't think I got a bad bottle. I think this is how this beer is supposed to taste. It doesn't appear to be made with Bavarian yeast, so it's lacking the banana and clove components that make beers like this manageable. I could see some people finding this refreshing if drank on a hot summer day, but in the dead of winter it's just barely tolerable. Number 7, Untappd Pumpkin. Untappd is a brewery I've been enjoying exploring over the last year or two, and I've liked all the beers I've had, that is, until I tried pumpkin. This is not your average pumpkin beer. If it were, it'd be much better. This beer has an unusual spice palette that opts for sheer rusticness over sweetness or pumpkin pie flavor. It's actually a bit difficult to describe what's going on here. The spices are most likely nutmeg and cinnamon, but they don't have the familiar sweet combination you get in most other brews of the style. It's like liquefied potpourri, bitter, astringent, and earthy. The label indicates the beer is made with organic pumpkin, and it's possible that's what I'm tasting, if the pumpkin itself rather than the sweet puree that they use in most other beers, like Saratoga Pumpkin. That's fine, the result is just a bad tasting beer. These flavors just don't work together. I even get a salty, almost bile-like flavor on the finish, which is quite off-putting to say the least. Finishing the serving was quite a challenge. Number 6, Shusett Pumpkin. When I smelled and tasted Shusett Pumpkin, I was surprised by how mediocre the beer was. The can itself appeared to be fresh and my glass was clean, yet it reeked and tastes quite lousy. Was this a bad can from a bad batch, or is this how it's supposed to taste? The first half of the palate is rather mild, nothing in the way of standard pumpkin beer spices. The flavor is so mild it seems like the beer is stale and old. It doesn't improve any throughout the swig, in fact it actually worsens. There's a sour off taste on the finish, similar to canned green beans. It's possible this is DMS. Whatever it may be, the usual pumpkin flavors just aren't there. Well, I can detect them if I pay close attention, but otherwise the beer just seems old. If this is the taste the brewery intended, I find it an extremely odd choice since there's so little flavor to be found here. It's one of the worst pumpkin beers I've ever had. Number 5, Miller High Life. As hard as I try, I really can't find any genuine flavors to Miller High Life. It's a beer that's much more bland and flavorless than it is offensive, but simply being inoffensive does not a good beer make. I think I'd actually prefer the overt rice flavor of Budweiser or the corn flavor of a malt liquor since they give your mouth something to concentrate on. In the case of this beer, it's just a cold liquid with a faint sweetness and a clean finish. Perhaps there's some canned corn water taste, but there's definitely nothing in the way of malts or hops. It's not particularly high in alcohol like a so-called ice beer, so what purpose does this beer serve? Number 4, Bud Light Platinum. I'm often amazed by how some low ABV beers can have so much flavor. Well, the complete opposite is true of Bud Light Platinum. Seriously, how can a beer of 6% ABV have next to no genuine flavor? In a weird way, it's actually a feat of achievement in brewing, but at the end of the day, it's still a bad beer. There's a slightly sharp, metallic flavor throughout the middle and a hint of lemon at the apex. The finish is awful, though as a wave of astringency, boiled corn, tin foil, and a melange of off flavors come whooshing in to kill what is otherwise a fairly tolerable palate. It's a struggle to finish even a single serving. I don't think this product will last very long. Number 3, Natural Ice. I've been saying for a while that I've been building up a tolerance to so-called economy adjunct macro lagers. I figured Natural Ice was a good test to see just how strong my palate's defenses against bad beer are. I'm happy to report my tongue seems to have passed the test. I could taste this beer in all its cheap glory, and while it wasn't aggressively off-putting, there certainly weren't any redeeming qualities. There's definitely a corn-forward flavor, followed by a significant starchy taste and a metallic finish. It reminds me of sucking on a very old ice cube from the back of the freezer. After a while, the off flavors seem to homogenize, then fade, which means the beer actually tastes a little better the more you drink it. There's perhaps a hint of sweetness from the corn, but it's nothing special and certainly nothing enough to save Natural Ice from itself. Number 2, Becks. I didn't realize it until I was halfway through, but Becks is now brewed in America by Anheuser-Busch, aka Budweiser. I like to think the authentic German version would be a little bit better than just barely tolerable. While I've had several fizzy yellow beers that are much worse than Becks, I have to say I'm generally disappointed by how bad this beer is. The flavor is virtually non-existent, which is nice actually. But it's the awful finish that ruins it. If it tasted like generic macro lager, it would be an improvement. Honestly, there's just nothing for my taste buds to latch onto. Though the backside of each swig brings with it an astringent, foul taste of something akin to salt water or maybe even bile. I'm not sure what's accounting for this, but I definitely do not like it. I don't see how anyone could. Number 1, Genesee Ice. Beers like Jenny Ice make me wonder what the point of their existence is. If you want to get drunk cheap, there are stronger beers for the same price. And despite the ludicrous marketing hyperbole, there is nothing, quote, premium about cheap ice brews. It's an adjunct macro lager as cheap as they come with the taste to match. The palate starts off surprisingly weak and watery. Nothing but cliche fizzy yellow lager water flavor, and even weaker than most. Next to no bitterness anywhere in the taste, which is fine, frankly. I actually do detect a subtle caramel sweetness on the finish, but it's quickly obscured by a foul taste of cheap, dry graininess akin to drinking dirty dishwater. And yes, it's just as gross as that sounds. Fun fact! Stewart's Mountain Brew Beer Ice was simply Jenny Ice repackaged, though the rights have since been sold to Miller, so it's a different recipe now. I will review that in 2014. Alright, so that's it. That's the top 10 worst beers I had in 2013. There's about another, 15 dishonorable mentions, all beers that scored a 4 or worse. that weren't bad enough to make this list. So we'll finish with that. Thanks for watching. I will see you around. Thanks for watching Chad's Beer Reviews.
Whether it's a lager or an ale, whether it's a stout, light, dark, or pale, if you can brew it, Chad can review it. It's time for Chad's Beer Reviews. He's not quite an amateur, not quite a connoisseur, but regardless of the brewer, he's got taste in beer for sure.
You can tell just by his gut, this guy is a bona fide beer nut.
So whether it's a porter or an IPA, whether it's from Europe or the USA, if you can brew it, Chad can review it. It's time for Chad's Beer Reviews.